Hercule Poirot is drawn into a baffling case when a delicate silk glove, torn and bloodstained, is found at a crime scene. What appears to be a trivial clue soon unravels a tale of jealousy, betrayal, and hidden identities. With his unmatched brilliance, Poirot must expose the truth before another life is lost. Chapter 1. The torn glove. In room 306, the Hotel Whodunit in Geneva was no stranger to discretion. Situated just beyond the hush of the Jardin Anglais, the old-world establishment had played host to foreign diplomats, fading royalty, and millionaires nursing broken hearts. Its velvet corridors and marble landings whispered with secrets, and on the crisp autumn evening of October 3rd, another secret began its slow, dreadful bloom. It was precisely 7:48 p.m. when the scream echoed down the east wing, shattering the quiet civility of the drawing rooms and card lounges. The source, room 306. Within 10 minutes, the night manager, an impeccably groomed gentleman named Leon Varcotte, had unlocked the door. With trembling fingers, accompanied by the hotel's doctor and a flustered chambermaid who refused to step past the threshold. Inside, the room was pristine, but for one terrible detail. Madame Marguerite Daventry, famed British mezzo-soprano turned eccentric arts patroness, lay sprawled across the Aubusson rug. Her head was turned unnaturally, resting against the leg of a carved settee. A crimson rivulet ran from beneath her platinum hair, soaking the delicate edge of her cream silk dressing gown. One slipper dangled from her left foot. The telephone receiver had slipped from her hand, its cord coiled like a serpent near her elbow. But what caught Leon Varchette's eye most was something stranger still: a single torn glove on the vanity, its silk sheen barely catching the lamp's light. Pale lilac, right-handed, torn at the thumb. Deliberately, it seemed. No other glove could be found. By 8:15 p.m., the Swiss authorities had sealed the room. By 8:30 p.m., the whispers had begun, for Madame Daventry was no ordinary guest. She had arrived 3 days prior, escorted by her much younger companion, a dark-haired man of continental elegance who registered under the name Sébastien Virel. Rumor within the hotel staff had it that he was either a composer or a confidence man, possibly both. The pair had taken adjoining rooms, yet few had heard any signs of intimacy between them. Indeed, the only visitor seen entering her suite in 3 days was a sharp-faced woman of about 50, fashionably austere, who had left the hotel the previous evening in great haste. In life, Marguerite Daventry had been a woman of flair, scandal, and shadows. In death, she had become a puzzle. The initial verdict, whispered over the body, was accidental fall, a clumsy stumble onto the corner of the marble coffee table. The hotel doctor suggested a fatal blow to the skull. Tragic, but not suspicious. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry, her jewels untouched. But then there was the glove. Why just one? Why torn? Inspector Renaud of the Geneva police, summoned promptly, had his doubts. He was a lean, methodical man with the air of a bureaucrat rather than a sleuth. As he examined the scene, his gaze rested repeatedly on the vanity where the torn glove lay. It had been set down, not dropped, intentionally placed. The tear in the thumb suggested more than wear and tear. It looked almost symbolic. That evening, he made discreet inquiries. Sébastien Virel had vanished. His room was empty save for two cufflinks in the sink and a half-burnt letter in the fireplace. Its contents indecipherable. No sign of a passport. Not a single suitcase remained. The chambermaid swore she had seen him enter Madame Daventry's room round 6:30 p.m., but she hadn't seen him leave. By dawn the next day, the Swiss papers carried the news with cautious curiosity. Famous English singer found dead in Geneva. Hotel police investigating unusual circumstances. Back in London, in a certain comfortable flat on Mount Street, Captain Arthur Hastings laid down the Times with raised eyebrows, I say. Poirot, he said, you remember Marguerite Daventry? That opera singer with the scandal about the Austrian count and the missing necklace? Poirot, who was adjusting his cuffs with fastidious care, turned from the mirror. Daventry. Mais oui, I remember her most vividly. A voice like velvet, a temperament like fire. She's dead, Hastings said, simply. Found in a hotel in Geneva. Rather odd circumstances. Room locked, a torn glove, and a vanished gentleman friend. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He reached for the newspaper with delicate fingers. A torn glove, you say? Just the one. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Poirot looked up, a peculiar gleam in his eyes. My dear Hastings, he said softly, this is no ordinary tragedy. A torn glove is like a torn truth. Someone left behind more than silk. They left behind a message, a message. Poirot rose, straightening his tie with precision. Order us tickets to Geneva, mon ami, and tell Miss Lemon to pack the brown valise. We are going to a hotel where someone has played a very dangerous aria and missed a note. And thus, the stage was set. The torn glove had not only marred the vanity, it had opened a door into deception, passion, and murder, and only Hercule Poirot would be able to see what lay just beyond. Chapter 2. The first close morning after their arrival in Geneva. Poirot and Hastings were seated in a quiet alcove of the Hotel Vernet's rosewood-paneled lounge, sipping their coffee from porcelain cups that seemed far too delicate for the grim matter at hand. Poirot, pristine in a dove-gray suit and a boutonniere that matched his tie precisely, appeared more concerned with the balance of cream in his cup than the grisly death that had drawn them there. Mon ami, he said at last, lowering the cup. The Swiss. They pride themselves on order, precision. Yet already, I sense, disorder. Hastings leaned forward. You're referring to the reports? Poirot inclined his head slightly. A woman dies under unusual circumstances. The lover vanishes. The authorities find no sign of struggle, and yet the room sings a different tune. One glove, torn. The telephone receiver in her hand. The slipper nearly off her foot. He tapped his temple. These are not clues, Hastings, they are notes in a melody gone wrong. They had arrived that morning via the overnight train from Paris, and Poirot had wasted no time in arranging a meeting with Inspector Renaud. The inspector had agreed to a private walk-through of the crime scene. Impressed or perhaps pressured by Poirot's reputation, room 306, still sealed under police authority, was unlocked precisely at 9:15 a.m. Poirot stepped into the room with reverent care, like a man entering a chapel. Hastings followed, noting that the room was understated in its luxury, ivory and gold accents. A large writing desk and a mirrored armor near the bed. The air smelled faintly of old perfume and wilted orchids. Poirot moved slowly, hands behind his back. The body was found here? He asked, stopping beside the carved coffee table. Yes, Inspector Renaud replied. Just there, leaning against the leg. Death from head trauma. Likely accidental. No bruising on the arms or hands, no defensive wounds. Poirot knelt, examining the base of the table. The blood. It's quite precise, is it not? Renaud frowned. We cleaned most of it for the sake of hotel discretion. Ah, Tudor's law discretion, Poirot muttered. And the glove? Renaud gestured to the vanity. Still there. No fingerprints. Right-hand glove only. Torn at the thumb seam. Poirot walked over and studied the lilac silk carefully. It was folded, not crumpled, as if someone had placed it deliberately. He plucked a pencil from the vanity drawer and used it to turn the glove. Curious. He murmured. What do you see? Hastings asked. Poirot did not answer. He turned instead to the dressing gown hung on the back of the bathroom door. One button was missing, ripped, it seemed. He said nothing, but his eyes lingered on it for several seconds. There was no sign of robbery? He asked. Renaud shook his head. Her jewelry case was untouched. Her handbag still contained money and passports. But we did find something of interest in the fireplace. He produced a clear plastic envelope containing a fragment of burned stationery. Only a few words were legible. Cannot go on this way. He suspects. Poirot took it, his eyes scanning the smudged ink. He suspects A. Poirot paced to the adjoining door. And the man, this Sebastian Virel? Gone, vanished that same night, left behind cufflinks, an empty drawer, and a false name. No travel documents, no sightings. We've alerted Interpol. Poirot frowned, touching the edge of the door. And the chambermaid? She claims she saw Virel enter Madame Daventry's room at 6:30. That's the last time anyone saw him. No sign of forced exit. The only window was bolted from the inside. Parfait, Poirot whispered. He turned back to the center of the room and stood still for a moment, eyes half closed. Then he opened them and glanced at Renaud. There are three things that trouble me, monsieur. First, the torn glove. Its placement is deliberate, not accidental. Second, the telephone. Why would she be holding it if she was taken by surprise? And third, he gestured toward the wardrobe. What of her gowns? Renaud blinked. Her gowns? Yes, Madame Daventry was a woman of extravagance. And yet, I count only to evening dresses. She was here for 3 days. She would have brought more. Renaud opened the wardrobe and, indeed, found it only half full. Poirot continued. She was planning to leave, perhaps. Or perhaps someone else left. Hurriedly, Hastings watched, a knot forming in his stomach. But why leave one glove behind? He asked. Poirot gave a small, private smile. Because sometimes, Hastings, the most damning clue is the one the murderer wants us to misunderstand. Inspector Renaud sighed. Poirot, what do you suspect? I suspect, Poirot said, that the truth is not in the blood, nor in the glove, nor in the missing man. The truth is in the timing. The timing? Yes, he said softly. The moment she picked up the phone. The moment he disappeared. The moment the glove was placed. All are moments of decision. Someone made a choice and made it too hastily. Poirot looked toward the door. Now, I wish to speak to the staff, he said. All of them, especially the maid who saw Mr. Virel. But more than that, there is one guest in this hotel who left the evening before Madame Daventry died. A woman of 50, fashionably cold, yes? Who was she? And why did she run? Renaud stared. You want to find a woman who is no longer here. Poirot smiled. Precisely. For if she left something behind, perhaps something as small as the torn glove, we must ask ourselves, not only who placed it, but why. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects. Drawing room on the first floor of the Hotel Whodunit had been hastily repurposed into a private meeting salon, with chairs arranged in a semicircle and the scent of polished walnut lingering in the air. A fire crackled in the hearth, though the day was not cold. Poirot had insisted on the fire, declaring it psychologically essential. Hastings thought it a touch dramatic. Inspector Renaud, arms folded, leaned against the door. Poirot stood in the center of the room like a conductor before an orchestra of suspicion. 5 people had been summoned, each of them, as Poirot remarked to Hastings, connected by proximity, not yet by guilt. Yet in that quiet room, tension flowed like a subterranean stream. Miss Isabel Hargrove, the first to enter, was the very image of clipped English efficiency. A former opera manager and longtime associate of Madame Daventry. She wore a charcoal skirt suit with a mourning brooch and carried herself like a headmistress. With a secret, she greeted Poirot with a nod but avoided Hastings' gaze altogether. She was a complicated woman. She said stiffly, brilliant, maddening, but she didn't deserve this. Edward Ned Winthrop, the second guest, slouched into the room with an air of disheveled defiance. Late 30s, with a journalist's stubble and eyes that missed nothing. He was the foreign arts correspondent for a London newspaper allegedly on leave. "I was just down the corridor," he muttered. "Room 302. I heard the scream. I've seen death before, but it was quiet, unnerving. And she was just lying there like a marionette with its strings cut." Poirot tilted his head. "And what, monsieur, brings you to Geneva?" Winthrop hesitated, then shrugged. "Research. A piece on exiled musicians. Old ghosts." Colette Duprat was next, a young French soprano. Not yet famous but radiant with potential. She had met Madame Daventry during a vocal competition the previous spring. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she clutched a crumpled handkerchief in both hands. "She promised to help me," Colette said in a whisper. "She said I had fire, that I reminded her of herself. I didn't think it would end like this." She shot a glance toward Isabelle Hargrove, then looked away. Poirot noted the tension. Gerald Perrault, a retired banker from Lyon, was a portly man in his 60s with a wry smile and perfectly shined shoes. He had occupied the suite across the hall from Madame Daventry's. A man of refined habits and harmless gossiper, so he portrayed himself. "I never knew the lady personally," he declared, but one could not help but hear the occasional emotion from across the corridor. Doors opening, footsteps late at night, that sort of thing. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Emotion, monsieur?" Perrault chuckled. "You know the type. Passion always had a room number, but she had flair, that one." Finally, there was Beatrice Moraine, the hotel's senior chambermaid, and the one who had reportedly seen Sebastian Virel last. She was middle-aged, stern-faced, and reluctant, clearly unused to formal inquiries. "I brought her tea at 6 o'clock, she said curtly. Monsieur Virel arrived a bit later. I saw him enter her room. That's all. Did you see him leave?" She hesitated. "No, but I wasn't on that floor the rest of the evening. I finished my round by 7. Poirot listened in silence as they spoke, each in turn. When they had all been heard, he paced the length of the room slowly. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, hands clasped neatly in front of him. "There's a dead woman in room 306. There's a missing man with a false identity. And there is, above all, a glove, a torn glove, placed with the kind of care that no mere accident bestows." He turned his gaze on each of them. "Someone in this room knows more than they have said." Winthrop scoffed. "We're suspects now, are we?" Poirot raised a hand. Non, monsieur. Not suspects. Elements of the truth. Each of you carries a piece, some small, some large, of a story that has not yet been told." Miss Hargrove adjusted her collar. "Are you suggesting one of us killed her?" "I am suggesting," Poirot said, "that Madame Daventry had secrets, and secrets, when they are threatened, have a way of unmasking themselves violently." Hastings, who had been scribbling notes, looked up. "Poirot, do you think the Sebastian Virel, the lover, is a red herring?" Poirot did not reply immediately. Instead, he looked to Beatrice Moraine. "You say you saw him enter the room, but not leave. Were the lights on?" "Yes," she said. "The reading lamp. She always kept it on after sundown." Poirot nodded to himself. "And yet, the glove was placed with such deliberation. It could only have been by someone unhurried, someone who knew they had time." He stepped forward. "Monsieur Renaud, I ask that you quietly re-examine the hotel registry. Cross-check the arrival times, but not for Sebastian Virel. He is a shadow, and shadows vanish." Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice lowering. "No, mon ami. What we must find is not the man who vanished, but the woman who left." Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. Though it was not the first time Hercule Poirot had entered a crime scene of delicacy and confusion. His arrival at the Hotel Whodunit 2 days prior had been marked by a kind of stillness, a hush that fell over the staff as if something inevitable had just stepped across the threshold. He was precisely on time, dressed immaculately in a tailored suit of ash gray, with a white pocket square folded into a perfect triangle. Poirot entered the grand foyer not like a guest, but like a judge summoned to a private trial. His patent leather shoes made barely a sound on the marble floor, but heads turned nonetheless. He walked with purpose, as though the layout of the hotel was already printed in his mind. At his side, Captain Hastings carried a leather satchel, his gait more hurried, less composed. While Poirot exuded precision, Hastings radiated polite confusion. They were greeted by Inspector Renault in the lounge, a man who, though courteous, wore the tight expression of one who felt both grateful and challenged by Poirot's presence. "You received the police report, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot took the offered folder with 2 fingers, as if reluctant to crease it. "Oui, merci. Though I find that reports are much like painted portraits, Inspector. They capture a likeness, but never the soul." Renault blinked. "The facts are all there." Poirot gave him a gracious smile. "Ah, but the facts, they are like crumbs left on a cloth. One must look how they fell." Their first destination had been room 306, where Poirot moved through the suite with the gravity of a priest in a confessional. He said little. He touched nothing. But he looked, not just at the glove on the vanity, or the blood-darkened fibers of the rug, but at the subtle things, the small shift in the curtain pleats, the faint aroma of mimosa perfume long evaporated from the sheets, the mirror tilted slightly off-center on the armoire. He paused near the telephone. Its cord slack. She reached for help, Poirot murmured. Or intended to. But who would she call? The police, the desk. No, not if she knew her killer. He gave Hastings a glance, which I believe she did, from the very first moment. Poirot dismissed the notion of a random burglary or accident. Non, Hastings, he had said. This was not a crime of opportunity. It was a performance. Now, 2 days later, as he sat with the assembled guests in the drawing room, his impressions from those earliest moments still lingered in his mind. For Poirot's method was always the same: impressions first, suspicions second, and truth at the last dot, and the impressions he had formed were revealing themselves already. Miss Isabel Hargrove, for instance, when Poirot had first met her in the lounge the day before, she had extended a hand with reluctance rather than grief. Her mourning was restrained, calculated perhaps too much so. "You knew Madame Daventry long?" Poirot asked her. 15 years, she replied. "We worked closely during her opera years. Later, I helped with her charitable foundations, and her personal life. She was complicated," Hargrove said. "Trust did not come easily to her. She had enemies. She created them often." Poirot had noted the phrasing. Had enemies. Past tense. Curious, no. Edward Winthrop, the journalist, had greeted Poirot with guarded amusement. "So, the famous Belgian sleuth arrives. Will you need a magnifying glass?" Poirot had chuckled. "Non, monsieur. I prefer to magnify with the little gray cells." Winthrop's wit masked something else, a nervous energy. During their conversation, he'd tugged at his collar and checked his watch twice. That meant one of 2 things. Either he was late for something, or he was hiding something he hoped time would erase. Colette Duprat, the singer, had been the most openly emotional. Yet, when Poirot asked where she had been at the time of the murder, she answered without hesitation, "In my room. Room 318. Alone. Did anyone see you?" "No," she admitted. "But I did nothing wrong." Poirot had nodded politely, though he made a mental note. Truth is never defensive unless it is protecting something else. And then there was Gerald Perrault, the retired banker. Poirot had watched him closely as he recounted what he'd heard that night. Perrault spoke confidently, almost with relish. Yet there was something to practice in the rhythm of his words to rehearsed. And Beatrice Moraine, the chambermaid, though her manner was stoic, Poirot had observed her hands as she spoke. They trembled. She was frightened, not just cautious. She had seen more than she had said, returning to the present moment. Poirot now addressed them all again. "I tell you now, I do not believe this was a simple act of passion," he said, voice measured. "Nor do I think Sebastian Virel is merely a man who fled. No, he is part of the puzzle. Yes, but not the whole." He paused, letting the silence press down. "I believe this crime began before anyone realized it had. I believe Madame Daventry did not stumble into her death, nor was it brought upon her by chance. I believe it was arranged cleverly." He straightened his cuffs, his voice lowering. "And I believe that someone in this hotel is playing a role." He turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami. Let us take the next step. Where to now?" Hastings asked. Poirot smiled thinly. "To the past, Hastings. Always, the motive is buried there." Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. Sky above Geneva turned overcast as Poirot began his first round of private interviews, as though the weather itself mirrored the veil of secrets draped across the Hotel Whodunit. He requested the use of the small music room at the end of the corridor, a quiet chamber with a grand piano that had not been tuned in years. The room's acoustics, Poirot claimed, were excellent for listening not just to words, but to what lay beneath them, the truth. "Hastings," he murmured as they entered, "often speaks most clearly in silence." One by one, the suspects were invited in, none under formal suspicion, yet all under Poirot's relentless scrutiny. That Miss Isabel Hargrove was the first to sit before him. Stiff as ever, her handbag clutched tightly against her side like a shield. "I will not waste your time, Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice taut. "Marguerite and I had our differences, certainly, but I had no reason to harm her." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Let us not concern ourselves with reasons to harm, mademoiselle. Let us begin with what you saw or heard that night." She took a breath. "I was in my room, reading. I went to sleep around 10. No visitors? None. No phone calls." She hesitated just enough to earn Poirot's full attention. "A short call," she admitted, "around 7:30. From Marguerite. She wanted to speak about Colette Duprat. She was agitated. Said the girl had disappointed her. In what way? She wouldn't say. Only that she was considering withdrawing her support." Then she hung up. Poirot leaned back slightly. Madame Daventry had a temper, non? She had. Moods, Miss Hargrove replied carefully. But she was rarely unsure. That phone call, she sounded confused. Not like herself. Poirot nodded. "Thank you, mademoiselle. One last question. Did Madame Daventry ever mention the name Sebastian Virel before this trip?" For the first time, something flickered behind her eyes. She looked away, only once. "She said he was dangerous when he was desperate." Poirot said nothing, but gestured to the door. As Miss Hargrove left, Hastings whispered, "She's hiding something." "Of course." Poirot replied mildly. "But what? That is the question." Next came Edward Winthrop, who entered with a smirk and an unlit cigarette, which he spun between his fingers like a coin. "Charming setup," he said. "Are you planning a recital?" Poirot gestured to the chair. "Perhaps you will be the first act, monsieur." Winthrop gave a short laugh and sat. "You knew Madame Daventry?" Poirot asked, only professionally. "I interviewed her twice, once in London, once in Vienna. She had opinions, loud ones, and yet you chose to stay at the same hotel during her visit." Winthrop raised an eyebrow. "Coincidence? I'd been here 2 days before she arrived." "Pure chance." "Chance," Poirot echoed. "A curious thing. And yet you were in the room closest to hers. I requested it. I like that part of the hotel. Fewer children." Poirot folded his hands. "Tell me, what did you hear the night of her death?" Winthrop paused. "A crash, around 8. Then silence. I thought she dropped something. She was fond of dramatic entrances and exits. I thought nothing of it until I heard the scream." "Who screamed?" I don't know. A maid, I think. I looked out, saw people gathering. Poirot narrowed his eyes. And did you ever see Sebastian Virel? Winthrop grinned. Now that is a name. Sounds like a film villain. No, I never saw him. Not to my knowledge. But I did see someone leave her room the day before. Poirot sat forward. Yes, a woman. Older. Sharp features. Chic. She looked angry. She stormed down the hall with a suitcase. I thought she was her manager. You did not mention this before. No one asked. Poirot said nothing, merely waved him out. Colette Duprat was next, nervous, tearful, and far too eager to appear helpless. I adored her, she whispered. She was everything I dreamed of becoming, and yet, she told Miss Hargrove she was disappointed in you. Colette's eyes widened. No, that can't be true. She said she believed in me. Poirot remained silent, watching her closely. You had a private lesson with her the afternoon of her death, yes? He asked. Yes, in her suite. She corrected my phrasing in the Habanera. Then she said I lacked courage. Poirot tapped his fingers. Did you argue? She raised her voice. Said I was weak. Then I let men distract me. Men? Colette looked down. She may have meant Edward. He took me to lunch once. Poirot leaned forward. Did you see anyone enter her room after you left? Colette shook her head. No, I didn't want to look back. Poirot nodded. Very well. Merci, mademoiselle. Lastly came Gerald Perrault, who took the seat with a relaxed sigh. An odd business. Monsieur Poirot, I doubt I can help. Let us see. You said you heard movement that evening. Did you recognize any voices? Perrault shrugged. I heard footsteps, to people talking, then silence, not much to go on. You heard the voices? Yes, a man and a woman. The man's voice was deeper, French accent, but not locally. Poirot narrowed his gaze. And you are certain it was not the hotel staff? Absolutely. I've stayed here often. I know their rhythm. Poirot folded his arms. Merci, monsieur, that is. Most helpful. As Perrault exited, Poirot stood and turned to Hastings. Do you see, mon ami? The puzzle is beginning to reveal itself. Hastings blinked. Reveal? We only have contradictions. Poirot smiled gently. Exactly. And contradictions are like cracks in a mask. Through them, one may glimpse the truth. Chapter 6. First false let. It was just past 11 the next morning, when Inspector Renaud knocked sharply on Poirot's suite door, breathless and clutching a slip of paper. Something's come up, he announced without preamble. We found a signature. Poirot, who was engaged in aligning his cravat pin to precisely match the arc of his lapel fold, turned with interest. Ah, a signature, you say? From the hotel registry, Renaud replied, holding out the slip. Room 111. A Miss Celeste Vernier. Arrived 2 days before Madame Daventry. Checked out the night before the murder. No forwarding address. Hastings looked up from the armchair, where he had been trying to make sense of his scribbled interview notes. That must be the woman Winthrop saw leaving the corridor, the one who looked angry. Indeed, said Poirot, accepting the paper and examining the signature with a quiet hum. And Vernier is not a name one chooses by accident in Geneva. She gave me a French passport number. Renaud added, It's false, bien sir. Poirot's fingers danced over the name. Have you located her belongings? Only a room service tray and a torn page from a program booklet. No clothing, no luggage. She wiped the room clean. A woman who covers her tracks, Poirot murmured, but who still left a clue. Why check in under a false name unless one intended to observe someone unnoticed? Renaud frowned. You think she was watching Madame Daventry? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Or perhaps watching the man in her room. Just then, there came a knock. It was Beatrice Moraine, the senior chambermaid. She looked even more uneasy than before. Monsieur Poirot, I did not mention something earlier. He gestured for her to enter. Please, mademoiselle. The conscience it pricks at last, yes? She twisted her hands. The evening Madame Daventry died, I saw Mr. Winthrop leaving her room. There was a stunned silence. Poirot said nothing for a moment, only studied her. You are certain? I was coming back upstairs after fetching linens from the basement. I saw him step out and close the door behind him. It was just after 8 o'clock, and yet he claims he heard a crash from his own room. Hastings said quickly. A contradiction. Poirot nodded. A useful one. Renaud, however, was already moving toward the door. That's enough for me. I'm going to have a word with Mr. Winthrop. Non. Poirot called. Let us not be so hasty. But it was too late. Within 10 minutes, Winthrop had been summoned to the lounge, where Renaud confronted him with the maid's testimony. Winthrop didn't deny it. Yes, I was in her room, he admitted coolly. We argued. About what? Renaud snapped. She found out I was writing a book about her, an unauthorized biography. I'd been gathering stories for years. Her affairs, her finances, all of it. She was furious. Said I betrayed her. Threatened to sue. Poirot stepped closer. And then, she told me to get out. I did. I swear, she was very much alive when I left. She was pacing the room, shouting. And you returned to your own room? Poirot asked. Yes, without mentioning this to anyone during interviews. Winthrop laughed bitterly. You think I wanted to be at the center of this circus? That woman could ruin reputations just by raising an eyebrow. I was scared. Renaud crossed his arms. It doesn't look good for you, Mr. Winthrop. It does not, Poirot agreed. And yet, he turned to the inspector. If Monsieur Winthrop killed Madame Daventry to silence her, why not also destroy his own notes, his draft chapters, and why return to his own room so close if guilt weighed heavily on him? You think he's innocent? Hastings asked, surprised. Poirot raised a finger. I think he is a liar. Yes, but not the murderer. Then why hide the visit? Because he fears blame more than truth. That is often the case with guilty minds, but not necessarily murderous ones. Poirot turned back to Winthrop. Tell me one thing, monsieur. Did Madame Daventry mention the name Celeste? Winthrop frowned. No, but she did say something strange as I left. She said, he isn't who he says he is, and neither is she. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, 'twas interessant. And now we have a she. With that, Poirot thanked him and dismissed the gathering, pulling Hastings aside as the room cleared. You don't believe he did it? Hastings whispered. No, Poirot replied. He is too convenient. This is what murderers do. Hastings, they plant confusion and vanish into the space left behind. But then who? Poirot tapped his chin. We must think. Mon ami. Winthrop admits to the biography. He had access to personal truths. What if someone feared being exposed in that book? Someone close. Someone in her confidence. Miss Hargrove? Perhaps. Or someone else. A woman scorned. A lover displaced. A protégé with ambition. Poirot turned toward the window, where clouds gathered low over the lake. There's another piece still hidden, he said softly. Something beneath the torn glove. Beneath the false name, beneath the timing of a scream that came too late. He glanced at Hastings with a knowing look. Now we wait. The murderer will feel the noose tighten, and when they do, they will make a mistake. Chapter 7. The Psychological Gamut. Next morning, Poirot began the day in a peculiar manner. He had requested that each of the remaining guests, Miss Hargrove, Mr. Winthrop, Dr. Marchand, and Lydia Flaubert, be invited, one by one, to share a private cup of tea in the conservatory overlooking the mist-laced lake. It is not interrogation. Hastings, Poirot explained calmly as they waited for the first guest. It is psychological chess, tea and manipulation. Hastings asked. Poirot smiled. Exactement. Let us see who shifts beneath the weight of small pressure. First came Miss Hargrove. Sharply dressed in dove gray, her hands tight on the saucer as she sat. She sipped once, set the cup down, and glanced at Poirot warily. "I understand you've requested me." "Monsieur Poirot?" "Oui, mademoiselle." "Merely a friendly chat. A woman of such distinction as yourself, surely you observed more than you've let on." "I've told everything I know. Caroline was a troubled woman, but I had no idea someone would actually harm her." Poirot gave a small nod. "And yet, mademoiselle, you disliked her, no?" A pause. Her mouth twitched. She was difficult, impossible to please. "But that hardly makes me." Poirot held up a hand. "Non. I merely mean to understand. People are not murdered by accident. Someone wanted her dead. Someone with motive. And access." She frowned. "Access? You knew her routines, her preferred wine, her tendency to leave her door ajar during her late evening rituals." Hargrave's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying? That someone who knew such patterns could easily approach?" Without suspicion, a tight silence fell. Poirot leaned forward just enough to unsettle. "You did not like being replaced by Dr. Marchand, did you? Not in the will, not in her affections." Miss Hargrove stood abruptly. "I think I've indulged in this enough. Good day, Monsieur Poirot." As she left, Poirot turned to Hastings. "She is rattled, yes, but too proud to conceal true fury." "No, Hastings, not her." The second guest was Winthrop, who slouched into the chair with evident distaste. "Another round?" he muttered. Poirot offered him tea with a precise ceremony. "I find that tensions steep like leaves, Monsieur Winthrop, until their flavor becomes unmistakable." Winthrop smirked, though his eyes flicked toward the exit. "Look, I told you everything. I lied about the timing, yes, but I didn't kill her. You risked your reputation for that book," Poirot said mildly. "Perhaps your freedom, too. She was threatening to sue me." "You think I'd kill her for that?" Poirot stirred his tea. "She also threatened others. Perhaps someone whose secret was buried within your manuscript." Winthrop hesitated. "I don't know. There were many names she gave me. Old friends, enemies, lovers. But I never used real names, none, even when the truth would sell more copies." His gaze hardened. "I wrote with care, Poirot. Caroline and I, despite everything, understood each other." Poirot leaned forward. "Then tell me, monsieur, do you know Celeste Vernier?" Winthrop's brow creased. "Celeste? No. Should I?" Poirot studied him carefully. "Not a flicker of deception, no," he said slowly. "But she may have known you." When Winthrop left, Poirot remained silent for some time, staring into the steam rising from his teacup. Next was Dr. Marchand. He arrived fresh from a morning jog, sleeves rolled up, casual as ever. He took the tea with a smile. "You think I had something to do with this?" he asked, laughing lightly. "Caroline could be ruthless, but she wasn't someone I hated. She was amusing. You were cut from her will," Poirot said softly. "I didn't care about that. We'd grown distant long before she made the changes." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet you remained her companion, at events, at the hotel. She liked the image of us. I played along. Nothing more." "Then tell me, monsieur," Poirot said, voice sharp as a scalpel. "How did you afford a new medical research grant in Zurich last month, one worth nearly 500,000 francs?" Marchand's smile faltered. "That's private information, which I obtained from an old colleague of yours. So unless you explain, I may assume." "Blackmail?" Marchand stood. "I don't have to explain myself. I'm not on trial, not yet," Poirot said gently. "But a lie, no matter how dressed, is still a lie." Last came Lydia Flaubert, wearing a somber expression and a dark velvet coat. She sat silently, fingers folded on her lap. Poirot poured her tea with quiet care. "Mademoiselle Flaubert. You saw Madame Daventry as an idol, yes? I admired her. She helped my parents once, long ago, and yet She dismissed your music scholarship 2 months ago. Claimed you had no voice for opera. Said so in a very public way, did she not? Lydia's mouth tightened. She had a temper. That was not my fault. No, but you visited her room 3 times during the stay. Why, she asked me to deliver flowers, twice, and the third. Silence. Poirot's voice dropped. Did she threaten to expose something, mademoiselle? Something you wish to remain buried? Lydia stood slowly. You think I killed her, I think, Poirot said softly, that everyone has something to hide. She left without another word. When the door clicked shut, Hastings looked at Poirot. Well, any breakthrough? Poirot nodded, very slowly. Yes, Hastings. Now the psychological web is cast. And already, one of our flies has begun to twitch. Chapter 8. The letter that should not exist. Following afternoon, Poirot and Hastings sat quietly in the drawing room of the late Lady Daventry's suite, a chamber that had become less an object of mourning and more a landscape of clues. The pale curtains rippled in a breeze from the slightly ajar window, and the scent of dried roses lingered, faintly evidence of the floral tributes delivered over the past day. Poirot's eyes were closed, fingertips pressed together. He was not asleep. Hastings had learned by now that such moments were acts of deep rumination. Monsieur Poirot. Came the discreet voice of Inspector Grant at the door. He held a slim envelope, pale lavender in color, sealed with a circle of wax bearing the Daventry family crest. Poirot opened one eye, then both. A letter, he asked, rising. It was just handed to reception, Grant said. Marked for you. No return address. And postmarked this morning at precisely 7. Poirot took the envelope gently, examining the wax and handwriting with delicate care. Then, with the silver paper knife he kept with him always, he slit it open. He unfolded the single sheet inside. Hastings leaned over curiously, but Poirot held up a hand, eyes flicking across the page. My dearest Poirot, if you are reading this, then I am no longer among the living. Forgive the drama. I'm aware how theatrical this all sounds, but I've made a grave mistake. There's someone among my guests who knows the truth about Celeste Vernier, someone who will not let the past remain buried. I once thought I could bribe them into silence. I now fear it was not enough. If I die suddenly, you must assume I was helped along. The truth lies in the music box I keep behind the green vase. It will tell you everything. Carolina, there was a moment of stillness. A letter from the dead, Hastings murmured. But it couldn't have been sent today. Lady Daventry has been dead for 2 days. Exactament, Poirot said softly. Which means this was either written earlier and mailed by an accomplice, or forged entirely to mislead. Grant frowned. The postmark is genuine. Local postal code. Likely handed it to a clerk at the village post office just this morning, which means someone here posted it after she was already dead. Poirot said nothing more. Instead, he crossed to the fireplace and studied the mantel. As described, there sat a thick green-glazed vase, Gaelic in style, possibly Irish, behind it. Nestled tightly into the corner between the wall and the back panel of the mantelpiece was a delicate, dust-covered music box. He removed it with reverence. The box was made of dark mahogany, inlaid with pearl. He opened the lid, revealing a ballerina in mid-pirouette. When Poirot wound the key, the tune that played was haunting. Off-tempo, a child's lullaby, half-dash forgotten. And within, beneath the red velvet lining, was a folded piece of brittle stationery. Poirot extracted it carefully and unfolded the note. Celeste Vernier, born July 12, 1903. Daughter of Henry Vernier. Mother, unknown. Raised in the care of Caroline Daventry from 1912 onward. Status, never legally adopted. Education funded in private. Departed the household in 1922 after the incident. Final known location, Marseille. Hastings frowned. This reads more like a report than a letter. Poirot's eyes had grown sharp with intensity. She kept it. This was the connection she feared. Celeste Vernier was her ward. Perhaps even her daughter. A scandal. Perhaps more, Poirot murmured. This note suggests Celeste was erased from public record. Her existence is hidden. Why? Grant crossed his arms. What's the incident? That, mon ami, Poirot replied, is now the heart of this affair. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Lydia Flaubert stood there, breathless, her eyes wide. I don't mean to interrupt, but Inspector, someone has ransacked my room. Poirot turned instantly. When? Just now. I returned from the gardens and found everything overturned. My music case, my wardrobe. Did they take anything? Grant asked. I'm not sure. My scores were scattered everywhere, but it seemed targeted, deliberate. Poirot's brow furrowed. Come, let us see. Within minutes, they stood in Lydia's quarters. True to her word, drawers had been pulled out, the vanity was tipped, and her sheet music was strewn across the floor in disarray. Someone had rifled through the pages hastily. But Poirot's attention was drawn to something else. A perfume bottle shattered on the floor, a silk scarf half buried beneath the bed, a photograph frame turned face down. Not a robbery, Poirot said. A warning. Or a search. He crouched and lifted one torn scrap of music. It bore faint smudges of ink, and what looked like initials. C.V. Poirot read aloud. Celeste Vernier again. He stood, his mind beginning to fit pieces together. She is the ghost in this tale, and someone here is trying very hard to make sure her story never sees light. Hastings cleared his throat. You said earlier someone was twitching in your psychological web. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Oui, mon cher Hastings, and now, someone has begun to bite. Chapter 9. A name buried in ashes. The moon had begun its ascent by the time Hercule Poirot returned to the drawing room, but sleep had no place in his thoughts. Hastings followed close behind, his brow furrowed. Still holding the scorched music sheet they had taken from Lydia Flaubert's room. C.V. He muttered again. If Celeste Vernier's initials were on that sheet, do you suppose it was hers originally? Poirot nodded, though his expression remained unreadable. Yes, Hastings. Either it belonged to her, or someone wished it to appear so. Either way, it changes the shape of things. He crossed to Lady Daventry's escritoire, a rosewood bureau she rarely used, its drawers still delicately scented with violet ink and lavender oil. Poirot examined the lock. It was untouched. Let us examine the other remnants of her past, he murmured. The clues that she herself chose to keep. The top drawer was filled with stationery, old invitations, and a heavy gold seal stamp. The second, deeper drawer revealed more, bundled letters, tied in violet ribbon, each dated between 1911 and 1919. Poirot set these aside, his fingers moving swiftly and surgically. At the very bottom of the desk was a small, lidded tin, the sort once used to store sewing pins or coins. Inside, instead of metal or thread, was ash-fine gray dust with flecks of paper and soot. Poirot stared at it silently. What on earth? Hastings asked. Poirot lifted a single corner of a half-burnt scrap. The fire had not consumed it completely. In faded ink, in French, it read, Tu n'étais jamais qu'une ombre dans cette maison. You were never more than a shadow in this house. Poirot set the tin down with the reverence of a priest handling a reliquary. She tried to burn the memory of Celeste, he said quietly, but not completely, not all of it. There was a knock at the door. This time, it was Walter Devonish, the young estate manager. He looked pale, his fingers twitching at the brim of his hat. Sorry, sir. I know it's late, but I thought you should know. There's something strange going on in the stables. Poirot's eyes narrowed. What kind of something? I caught Miss Aldane, Miss Rosalind down there just now. She had a lantern and was rummaging in the hayloft like she was looking for something she dropped. But when I asked her if she needed help, she went pale and said she'd simply taken a wrong turn. Poirot rose instantly. "Come, Hastings." They followed Devonish out into the mist-heavy grounds. The night was unnaturally still, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. The stable stood at the far end of the property, unused for years but still locked and maintained out of Daventry pride. Rosalind Aldane was not there when they arrived, but the hayloft door hung slightly ajar, and the beam from Poirot's lantern revealed scuffed bootprints in the dust leading not to the back, but to a pile of broken planks behind the feeding trough. Poirot knelt there. Partially hidden in the straw was a small tin lockbox. Its hinges were rusted, but it opened with a soft groan. Inside was a folded document, aged, fragile. A birth certificate, in French. Poirot held it beneath the lantern. Celeste Jean Vernier. Born to Henry Vernier and Caroline Aldane. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered. She was not the ward. She was the daughter. Hastings drew a sharp breath. Then Lady Daventry had an illegitimate child? Poirot nodded slowly. Born before her marriage to Lord Daventry. Hidden away in France. Raised in secrecy. And when she could no longer be concealed, brought here under false pretenses. He stood, carefully folding the document and replacing it in the box. Caroline must have feared that this revelation would destroy her reputation, her place in society, and if Celeste ever returned, she would be a threat. Hastings finished. Quietly, as they turned to leave, Poirot stopped abruptly. In the corner of the hayloft, just visible beneath a beam, was a child's doll, its porcelain face cracked, its dress singed at the hem. Poirot picked it up. A small tag was stitched into the bodice. Pour Celeste, Maman, for Celeste. From Mama. There was a long silence. She kept this hidden all these years, Hastings said. Not hidden, Poirot corrected softly. Buried, like a grief never grieved, like a shame never confessed, back in the manor. Poirot placed the doll and the birth certificate on the drawing-room table. Grant joined them moments later, having completed interviews with the household staff. "You were right," he said grimly. "Someone was in Lydia Flaubert's room not long before she arrived. The window latch had been pried loose, and there were fresh boot scuffs outside in the ivy bed. Someone who feared what Lydia might reveal," Poirot said, "or feared she would stumble upon the wrong thing." Grant gestured toward the box. "What's that?" Poirot handed him the birth certificate. The name of the true scandal. The name Lady Daventry took to the grave, and someone else is still willing to kill to keep buried. Chapter 10. The missing portrait next morning brought a chill that clung to the estate grounds. Like an old rumor, clouds pressed low over the Daventry manor, and the usual hush of the halls had deepened into something colder, an awareness that secrets, once buried in ivy and ash, were beginning to stir. Poirot stood in Lady Daventry's private sitting room, which had been left untouched since her death. No servant dared clear it. Dust shimmered across the velvets, and the fireplace was filled with last winter's ash. Hastings stood beside him, arms crossed, while Chief Inspector Grant examined a wall, where faded wallpaper framed the outline of something once proudly displayed. "There used to be a painting here," Grant noted, running a finger along the cleaner square, roughly 2 feet wide. "Possibly a portrait." Poirot stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Oui, a portrait, perhaps of a young girl, hidden when her presence became an embarrassment." "Rosalind Aldane?" Hastings asked. Poirot shook his head. "No, Celeste Vernier." He reached into his coat and withdrew the birth certificate recovered from the lockbox. "Caroline had it here once, perhaps as a private indulgence or a symbol of guilt. But at some point, it vanished." Grant's brows furrowed. "And you think this missing painting is important?" Poirot tilted his head. "It is not just a painting. It is evidence, a depiction of the face someone once erased from history. the face that may yet be recognized. Just then, Walter Devonish arrived. Having been summoned by Poirot earlier that morning, he removed his cap, awkward but respectful. "You said you had a question, Mr. Poirot?" Poirot gestured to the empty wall. "Do you recall what once hung here?" Devonish frowned, eyes flicking to the faded outline. "A painting, yes. A girl in a white dress, if I remember right. Long dark hair. I thought it was Lady Rosalind as a child, but—" He hesitated. "Maisnon," Poirot said softly. "It was not Rosalind. It was Celeste." Devonish looked startled. I didn't know she had a sister." Poirot offered him a kind look, then steered the conversation further. "Do you know when it was removed?" The young man scratched the back of his neck. "A few years ago, just before Lady Caroline took ill. I remember helping Mr. Blodgett move some pieces into storage. That one was created separately, like it was important." "Storage," Poirot repeated. "In the west attic?" Devonish nodded. "That's right. Merci," Poirot said. "You've been most helpful." The west attic was a place few in the household had reason to visit. It was cluttered with heirloom trunks, furniture under sheets, and the scent of cedar and forgotten paper. Poirot led the way, lantern in hand, Hastings and Grant following closely behind. They opened crates one by one, until at last Hastings lifted the lid off a wooden box marked with old French shipping stamps. Inside, wrapped in canvas and linen, was a gilt-framed portrait. Poirot peeled back the fabric. A girl stared back at them, around 14. Pale blue eyes, dark curling hair, a high forehead, a rosebud mouth, and the faintest smile that felt somehow haunted. "She looks like—" Hastings stopped. "Yes," Poirot said, gently. "She resembles Lydia Flaubert." Grant studied the canvas. So, Lydia wasn't simply a tutor with connections to the family. She was Celeste's daughter. Poirot nodded. "And now, the reason for Lydia's presence becomes clearer. She came not only for employment, but for answers, for pieces of a life her mother never fully explained. And someone here knew who she was." Grant said grimly, "Or guessed it. Enough to strike first." Poirot studied the painted face one last time, then turned to Hastings. "There's one more person we must speak to, someone who has remained curiously silent, yet watches everything." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "Who, Mrs. Garrow?" "The housekeeper." Mrs. Garrow was waiting when they returned. A trim woman in her 60s, she bore herself like a sentry, eyes sharp, spine stiff, and mouth always one breath from disapproval. "I know why you've come, Mr. Poirot," she said without greeting. "You want to know what I saw?" Poirot inclined his head. "I trust your silence so far has not been feared, but something more difficult, loyalty." She gave a long, slow nod. "Lady Daventry wasn't always kind, but I served her for nearly 4 decades. I cleaned up after her mistakes, and I promised I wouldn't let the past drag her name through the mud. But someone has already died." Grant said, "Miss Flaubert. That promise may cost others their lives." Mrs. Garrow's hands trembled slightly, but she spoke clearly. "I knew Celeste. She was a quiet girl, always watching, never quite belonging. I saw her and Lady Caroline argue in this very house when she was 17. Then she was gone." "You knew she had a child?" Poirot asked later. "Yes. When Lydia came here, something in her face told me." Poirot leaned forward, gently. "Did Lady Daventry know that Lydia was Celeste's daughter?" "I believe she suspected," Mrs. Garrow whispered. "She started locking her door again at night. That's when the nightmares returned." Poirot stood. "She feared retribution," he said softly, "and someone else feared exposure." He paused, then looked to Hastings. "The portrait, the certificate, the glove, all point to one truth still hiding in this house." And in that moment, Poirot's eyes flashed with quiet certainty. Chapter 11. The gloved hand returns. A gray drizzle fell over the Daventry estate. dulling the stone pathways and whispering against window panes as Poirot, Hastings, and Chief Inspector Grant reconvened in the library. The fire had been recently lit, crackling with damp logs, but its warmth did little to lift the oppressive hush. Shadows clung to the corners of the vast room, as if reluctant to yield their secrets. "I received your message," Grant said as he stepped into the chamber, removing his overcoat and brushing droplets from his shoulders. "You found something?" Poirot motioned toward the hearth. "None. Something was meant to be destroyed, but as always, the fire does not quite finish the job." Kneeling at the fireplace, Hastings used the iron poker to sift gently through the blackened embers. "There," he said after a moment, lifting a fragment of scorched silk between the fingers. "Glove, torn at the wrist, just like the one discovered in Lydia's room." Grant took it from him, inspecting the damage. "Left-hand glove. The other was right hand, wasn't it?" Poirot nodded. "Indeed. And more interesting still, look closely along the seam." Grant squinted, then turned to Poirot. "Blood." Poirot retrieved a magnifying glass from his pocket and handed it over. "Not much, barely enough to see, but it is there, dried and drawn into the fibers." Hastings frowned. "So we have both gloves now. A matching pair, belonging to the same person, or planted," Grant added. Poirot remained by the fire, arms folded. "It tells us two things. First, that someone feared this glove being discovered. Second, they feared it enough to burn it." He paused. "And third, it was burned here, in the family's private library, where only members of the household and their trusted staff have access. It is no accident." Grant rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "You think the killer returned to the scene of the crime?" Poirot tilted his head. "Not necessarily. Perhaps they never left." Just then, the door creaked open and Rosalind Aldane entered, her face pale but composed, as always. Her eyes moved swiftly from Grant to Poirot, and then to the remnants in the hearth. "You found it," she said softly. Poirot did not look surprised. "You recognize the glove, mademoiselle?" She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I saw it once, in my mother's things, years ago. I believe it belonged to Celeste." Poirot studied her with narrowed eyes. "Curious that you should mention her now, when so little has been spoken of her." Rosalind's hands clenched. "Because I was forbidden. Even as a child, I sensed something. Hushed, something that hovered around Mother like a ghost. She kept a portrait of Celeste once, hidden in her dressing room. I only glimpsed it once." She paused. "I was jealous of her," she confessed, "even though she was gone. I think, perhaps I still am." Hastings and Grant exchanged a glance, but Poirot merely nodded. "Jealousy is a common emotion," he said gently, "but it is rarely the motive we first suspect." Rosalind turned toward the fire and stared at the coals. "Do you think Lydia knew she was related to us?" "She knew," Poirot said, "but she also sought answers. And when she came here, she was met not with honesty but with fear. Someone feared what her presence would reveal." She nodded slowly, then turned and left the room without another word. Grant let out a breath. "She's holding something back." Poirot replied, "but not malice. Her jealousy is old embedded, not active. She is not our murderer." He moved toward a small writing desk in the corner of the room and opened its drawers with deliberate care. "We must now consider something vital. Whoever killed Lydia had to be familiar not just with the estate, but with its history. Someone who understood the relationships hidden beneath the surface, and who could manipulate them." Hastings crossed the room to the bookshelf, scanning the spines. "And what of the gloves? Surely a woman's accessory?" "Not exclusively," Poirot said. "The glove, while delicate, could have belonged to a man with smaller hands, or even a woman using someone else's garment to disguise her involvement." Grant leaned against the mantel. "We've circled every suspect and returned to the same five: Rosalind, Devonish, Mrs. Garrow, Mr. Blodgett, And of course, Lydia herself if it were suicide. Poirot raised a finger. Ah, but we forgot one more. He turned. Mr. Ambrose Vernier. Grant blinked. Celeste's old suitor? He hasn't been seen for years. Poirot's expression darkened. Precisely. Yet the glove we found in Lydia's drawer bore the initials AV embroidered in silk thread. The other, burned, bore none. But the pair is matched by stitching and fabricage. Grant straightened. You think he's involved? I think, Poirot said softly, that he never truly left this house. Or at least, he left something behind. Chapter 12. A visitor at dusk. The afternoon storm had matured into an oppressive dusk, where the rain no longer poured in torrents, but hung in the air like breath from a forgotten god. The Daventry estate, muffled beneath clouds and creeping mist, looked more like a mausoleum than a manor. Inside, Poirot stood by the tall drawing-room windows, eyes sharp, watching the gravel drive below. Hastings joined him, teacup in hand, though he hadn't taken a sip in some time. A letter delivered by hand, Poirot said without turning. No markings, no return address, and delivered in silence. Yes, Hastings replied, tapping the envelope Poirot had placed on the table beside him. Very strange. Do you think it's from Vernier? I suspect so, Poirot murmured, though it is not proof. It is, as always, merely an invitation to think. The clock in the hallway chimed 6. And then, from the hall, the butler's voice, a visitor, Miss Aldane. All occupants of the drawing-room turned. Rosalind, who had been sitting in the corner armchair reading a book she clearly hadn't turned a page of in 20 minutes, stiffened. Who is it? She asked quietly. The butler hesitated, his composure shifting only slightly. Mr. Ambrose Vernier. Miss. Rosalind's book dropped with a soft thud to the carpet. Poirot looked instantly to her, his mind sharpening like a blade. Mademoiselle. It would seem the past comes to visit. She stood slowly, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I don't understand. I thought he had died. Poirot moved past her gently. No, mademoiselle. Merely vanished perhaps into guilt or shame. We must now see which. Ambrose Vernier entered a moment later, ushered in by the butler and cloaked in damp wool. He was taller than Poirot had imagined, with a refined, almost noble bearing. His face, once likely quite striking, was now lined with time and marked by heavy eyes. A man burdened by more than age. He paused upon entering, his gaze sweeping the room and settling not on Poirot, nor Hastings, nor Grant, who now entered behind, but on Rosalind. You are just like her, he said. His voice was soft, almost reverent. Celeste. Rosalind did not move. Vernier turned at last to Poirot. You are the detective, Hercule Poirot. Poirot inclined his head. At your service, monsieur. I know why you summoned me, Vernier said. Though I had hoped it would not come to this. Poirot gestured to a chair. Then please, enlighten us. The silence surrounding Celeste and Lydia grows louder each day. You have come, so speak. Vernier sat down slowly, placing his soaked hat on the floor beside him. Celeste and I were to marry. It was arranged discreetly, but the family, Sir Reuben, especially refused to accept it. She was illegitimate, but worse in their eyes, emotional, to French, to free. She was banished quietly, with money, of course. Always money. Rosalind's voice cut through the air. And you let them send her away. Vernier's head lowered. I fought, but I was young, and they threatened to destroy my career. I hesitated, and that hesitation cost her everything. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low. And Lydia? He raised his eyes. She was Celeste's daughter. Mine too. She wrote to me 2 months ago. She had discovered fragments, letters, a photograph, and a bracelet engraved with the initials AV. She wanted to meet. Grant spoke now from near the door. And did you? Vernier nodded. 3 weeks ago, in London, at a cafe in Kensington. She was. Brilliant, determined. She had my eyes. Poirot studied Vernier's face. You did not come forward after her death. I panicked, Vernier admitted. And I had no proof to support her claim. To reveal myself would only muddy the waters, or so I believed. Poirot's tone turned sharper. And yet, monsieur, a glove was found among Lydia's possessions. An old silk glove, bearing your initials, and another burnt in the fireplace. Explain. Vernier's brow furrowed. Gloves? I haven't worn gloves like that in 20 years. Poirot's eyes narrowed. So someone planted them either to frame you, or to divert us. Vernier fell into silence. It was not a silence of guilt but of dawning horror. Wait, he said suddenly. Celeste, when she left, she took nothing. But she always kept one pair of gloves. A gift from me, monogrammed. Hastings blinked. You think someone found them? Poirot's voice was soft now. Or perhaps someone never forgot them. Someone who once saw Celeste wear them. Someone in this house. A heavy silence followed Dot, and then Rosalind whispered, Mother. All eyes turned to her. She must have kept them. Celeste was her half-sister, after all. Even if she denied it publicly, she might have hidden a keepsake. Poirot nodded slowly. And someone found that keepsake. Someone who used it. Someone who wished to ensure Lydia's death remained a closed door. The room chilled despite the fire. Ambrose Vernier stood. Then you believe her death was murder? Poirot turned toward the window once more. Yes, and the glove, Monsieur Vernier, is no longer evidence of your guilt but of the killer's fear. Someone sought to silence the past, and now we must draw them out before they strike again. Chapter 13. The portrait in the attic following morning dawned gray and indifferent, as though the skies themselves were undecided on whether to mourn or merely watch. Breakfast at the Daventry estate was a muted affair. Conversation was spare. Forks clinked lightly against porcelain, and the air was heavier than the eggs and toast served upon it. Poirot, dressed immaculately as always, declined his second cup of coffee and instead gestured toward Hastings. Mon ami, shall we take a walk? I believe there is something in this house that requires our attention. Hastings looked up, surprised. Where to, Poirot? Poirot folded his napkin. The attic. It was Rosalind who led them. She seemed distant, her earlier strength dimmed by Vernier's arrival the night before. She had spoken little to him, and Poirot had noticed the trembling in her hands as she passed him in the hall. The attic hasn't been touched in years, she said as they ascended the narrow staircase, the old wood creaking beneath their steps. Mother used to come up here sometimes, but after her stroke, it remained locked. Poirot glanced at the padlock on the narrow door at the top. It was aged, rusted, and gave way with a single tug of the key. The attic greeted them like a memory dust-filled and thick with forgotten breath. Cobwebs clung like old grudges to the beams, and lawn-covered furniture slept beneath yellowing sheets. Hastings wrinkled his nose. Good heavens, the smell like old ink and mothballs. Poirot smiled faintly. Indeed, Hastings, a room of secrets always smells like this. They began to look slowly. Poirot's hands touched nothing, but his eyes saw everything. Boxes labeled in thin handwriting, crates of old books, tarnished silver frames, and then, against the far wall, half shrouded in a canvas sheet, was an upright object too tall to be furniture. Rosalind approached it and hesitated. Her fingers curled around the cloth. I think this was covered the year Father died. With one motion, she pulled it free. A portrait stared back at them. It was of a woman dark-haired, with pale eyes, high cheekbones, and a mouth caught somewhere between melancholy and defiance. The painting was skillfully rendered, with the artist's initials, A.V., marked in the bottom corner. Celeste, Rosalind whispered. Hastings let out a breath. Good Lord, the resemblance to Lydia is uncanny. Poirot studied it carefully. This was painted by Vernier. Rosalind nodded. He was an artist before he became a teacher. He painted this when they were courting, I believe." Poirot stepped forward and examined the back of the frame. Carefully, he lifted the painting from the wall and tilted it gently searching dot, and then he found it taped to the back. Hidden beneath a yellowed sheet of backing paper was an envelope, thin, unmarked. Poirot slit it open with care and withdrew a folded sheet inside. It was a letter, written in a feminine hand. Rosalind read over his shoulder as he unfolded it. "Ambrose, if you are reading this, it means you came back. I could not stay where I was not wanted. But I never regretted Lydia, not once. She was bright and brilliant, and she knew what she wanted. If only this house were not filled with so many locked doors and bitter hearts, she might still have a place here. I leave this here, because I have no one else to tell. The day I left, I saw Maureen burn a letter addressed to you. I confronted her. She slapped me, told me I was a stain they could not scrub clean. I know she hated me more than Father ever did. If something happens, look here." "They won't look here. This house is built on silence." Celeste Roslind's hand went to her mouth. "Mother burned a letter to him? I had no idea she hated Celeste so." Poirot folded the letter with care. "Hatred, mademoiselle, often does not shout at whispers. It lingers, and sometimes it passes from one generation to the next." He turned toward Hastings. "Do you not see, mon ami? Lydia's discovery of this portrait, of her likeness to it, might have been her first step toward unraveling the truth. And perhaps she found this very letter. Perhaps she read it, and then someone killed her to stop her from telling more." Hastings murmured grimly. Poirot nodded. "Yes, this portrait was not only a painting, it was a mirror. And a mirror, when placed before those who live in denial, becomes a threat." Rosalind stepped back from the canvas. "She must have come up here, Lydia, perhaps during one of her long walks through the house. She had a key to nearly every room." Poirot considered this. "Then we must find out who followed her, who feared what she saw from below." The sharp ring of the telephone echoed through the empty halls. They descended quickly, reaching the main foyer just as the butler placed the receiver down. He turned to them, pale. It was Inspector Vernal. "The post-mortem is complete." Poirot's brows lifted slightly. "And she was poisoned, sir. Not by the tea that day but days before. A cumulative dose of atropine." Rosalind stared. "Atropine? But that's used for eyes, for nerves, or found," Poirot added quietly, "in deadly nightshade." Hastings blinked. "Nightshade? You mean someone fed it to her gradually, without her knowing?" Poirot nodded, eyes darkening. "Yes, someone very close. Someone who smiled as they served her." He looked toward the staircase, as if seeing into a shadowed memory. "And now, Hastings, it is no longer only a question of why she died, but who chose the slowest way to silence a truth they could not bury." Chapter 14. The belladonna teat was nearly midday when Hercule Poirot, cane in hand, summoned Mrs. Willow, the housekeeper, to the drawing room. The sunlight had crept in tentatively, casting a pallid sheen over the room's furnishings. It did not warm the space, it merely revealed its corners. Mrs. Willow entered, her hands folded before her, the silver of her hair tightly pinned and her uniform impeccably starched. "You sent it to me, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked with the guarded patience of someone accustomed to both grief and suspicion. "Indeed, madam," Poirot replied, motioning her to sit. "There is no need to be alarmed. I merely wish to clarify a few things about the household routines." She sat with care. "Of course." Poirot leaned slightly forward. "You manage the meals, yes?" She nodded. "The cook, Betsy, prepared them, but I oversaw the menus and dietary notes. Miss Lydia had a very particular digestion, so I handled her tray personally most mornings." "Particular digestion?" Poirot asked. "Pray explain." "She didn't trust anyone else with her food." "Not entirely. Since she returned last year, She grew increasingly particular, avoided sugars, dairy, and certain oils. She once accused Betsy of overcooking a carrot. Poirot gave a small nod. And tea? Mrs. Willow hesitated. She preferred to prepare that herself. Always had a kettle in her room, a tray, and a tin of loose herbs she kept locked in her cabinet. Sometimes she asked for boiled water to be sent up, but she brewed it herself. Hastings, seated near the fireplace, frowned. That makes it all the more odd, doesn't it, Poirot? If she made her own tea, who could have slipped in the poison? Ah, Poirot said, lifting a finger. But we do not yet know if the poison was administered through the tea, my friend. We only know it was atropine, likely belladonna, and cumulative. So we ask, who might have prepared anything for Miss Lydia on a regular basis, outside of meals? Mrs. Willow looked uncertain. She rarely accepted food from anyone else, although, once a week, she let young Alice the maid bring up her chamomile infusion before bed. Just hot water and flowers. And was that chamomile tea always from her own tin? Poirot asked softly. The housekeeper looked thoughtful. I believe so. Though once, a month ago, she complained the flowers tasted different bitter. I remember her saying it reminded her of her mother's old remedies. Nightshade? Hastings said grimly. Poirot nodded slowly. The bitter trace of belladonna. He rose, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket. Madam Willow, I shall speak to Alice, if you please. The housekeeper gave a tight nod and left. Poirot turned to Hastings. You see, mon ami, the method reveals much about the mind of the murderer. A slow death over days implies calculation, not panic. It also suggests that the victim was, in some way, expected to grow old gradually and die quietly, with no suspicion. But why go to such trouble? Hastings asked. Lydia was wealthy. Yes, but it's not as though there weren't easier means. Why not fall down the stairs? Or a car accident? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Because such methods speak loudly. Poison, on the other hand, speaks in whispers. It is a weapon used by those who wish to remain invisible. The door opened, and Alice entered young. Timid, her face flushed with confusion. She clutched her apron as she stood before them. Poirot offered her a kind smile. Come in, mademoiselle. Sit, do not fear. We only wish to speak. She obeyed, nervously smoothing her skirt. You helped Miss Lydia in the evenings, yes? Poirot asked gently. Yes, sir. Just at night. Boiled water for her tea. Sometimes helped her with her shawl or laid out her night things. Did you ever see what was inside her tea tin? Alice shook her head. No, sir. She kept it locked. I just brought the kettle or a jug, left it on the table, and went out. Poirot nodded. And did anyone else ever go into her room when you were not there? Alice hesitated. I did once see Mr. Vernier, the schoolmaster, come out of her room, about a week before she died. He looked strange, pale, like he'd seen something. Poirot's brows rose. Are you sure of this? Yes, I was coming up the stairs with her kettle, and he nearly bumped into me coming out. Didn't say a word. Poirot nodded slowly. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. When she had gone, Hastings turned to him. That complicates things, mais Poirot murmured. Vernier enters Lydia's room secretly. Lydia tastes bitterness in her tea. A letter is found hidden behind her mother's portrait, implicating Marine in deceit. And now we know the poison was not swift, but delivered over time. He began to pace. We must ask ourselves, Hastings, who in this house had the knowledge of belladonna, the access to Lydia's personal habits, and a motive that would withstand patience. You suspect Vernier? Poirot's expression darkened. I suspect many things, but what I do not suspect is chance. Lydia was killed by someone who knew her well, someone who needed her to disappear not with violence, but with silence. He paused at the window, staring out over the wine-tossed trees. And now, he whispered. We must listen more closely to what was left unsaid. Chapter 15. The secrets behind the curtained library was dim, save for a single oil lamp burning steadily on Poirot's side of the desk. It cast long shadows across the bookshelves and gave the impression of a confessional, rather than an interrogation. Hercule Poirot sat with folded hands, his expression neutral, but his gaze keen. Opposite him, Mr. Vernier fidgeted in his chair. The schoolmaster's formerly neat appearance had grown slightly unkempt, his collar a touch askew, his eyes lined with shadows of sleepless nights. You wish to speak with me privately? Vernier asked, his voice steady but brittle. Oui, monsieur, Poirot replied smoothly. I believe you have not told me everything. Vernier stiffened. I told the constable all I knew on the night of Miss Armitage's death, and yet you entered her room a week before she died and failed to mention it. A beat of silence passed. Then, who told you that? Poirot merely raised an eyebrow. It does not matter. The truth, if you please. Vernier leaned back, exhaling slowly. I went to return something. A book, a volume of Swinburne. I had borrowed it without asking. I knew Lydia disliked disarray, and I feared her reaction. So I waited until I thought she was out walking. But she was not out walking. No, she was in the adjoining room, perhaps the bathing chamber. I heard water. I left the book on her desk and tried to slip out unnoticed. Poirot tilted his head. And yet Alice the maid saw you. Pale, rattled. Vernier's eyes narrowed. Yes, because I saw something on her desk before I left. A torn piece of paper. Handwriting. I recognized the handwriting. You may as well speak plainly, Poirot said. You saw a letter. From Maureen? Vernier hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. A half-burned letter in Maureen's hand. There was something cruel in the tone, accusatory, something about Lydia owing her more than apologies. Poirot let the silence hang. Then he said gently, You had feelings for Miss Celeste Armitage, did you not? The color drained from Vernier's face. That's absurd. Poirot merely watched him. Vernier sighed. It is no secret I once admired her. But Celeste was above me, distant, always preoccupied. Her heart was not here, not in this house, not in this life. Poirot nodded slowly. And yet she returned. With her daughter, with her grief, and with an air of secrets unspoken. Tell me, monsieur, did you speak with Celeste in the days before her death? Vernier swallowed. Once, in the garden. She was strange. She asked me about belladonna, whether the first still grew it at the school for medicinal purposes. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And did you? Yes, a small patch in the botany garden, locked behind a gate. Did you give her any? No. His voice trembled. I refused. I thought she meant it for herself. Her eyes were tired, her spirit flickering. Poirot rose and moved to the window. You refused her, but someone else did not. Belladonna entered this house, entered Miss Lydia's tea. And you, monsieur, stood between multiple histories, Celeste's, Maureen's. Lydia's, and watched them collide. I didn't kill Lydia, Vernier said quietly. No, Poirot agreed. But you saw what others missed. Tell me, what did Celeste say in that final conversation? Vernier hesitated. She said that something was about to come undone, that she'd tried to protect someone, but perhaps she had only made things worse. She said the truth, when it finally arrived, would burn. Poirot returned to the table. And the truth, monsieur, is patient. It does not rot. It waits behind curtains, beneath silk gloves, inside letters tucked behind portraits. A pause. Did you know Lydia kept a diary? Vernier blinked. No, neither did anyone else, Poirot said softly. But she did. A slim red book, locked in her nightstand. And in it, she chronicled her suspicions. She feared she was being poisoned but did not know by whom. Why wouldn't she say anything? Vernier whispered. Poirot's gaze darkened. Because she doubted herself. Because the poison worked slowly, clouding the mind before it stole the breath. Because she trusted too little, or perhaps the wrong person. He sat again, hands steepled. I will ask you one last question, and I want you to think carefully. The night before Lydia died, did you see anyone near her room? Vernier was silent for a long moment. Then, yes, I was in the corridor. I'd dropped my pen and gone back for it. I saw Maureen leaving Lydia's room. Her face was calm, too calm. She didn't see me. Poirot closed his eyes. Merci, monsieur. That is all. Vernier left, shoulders slumped, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone once more. He's hiding things, Hastings murmured. Oui, Poirot said, but not murder. He hides guilt, affection, fear, but not the crime. He turned slowly. We are near the end now. Hastings, very near, and I begin to see the shape of it. Chapter 16. The red dye-wreath storm had passed by morning, but the manor remained steeped in tension. The clouds hung low over the lake, reflecting a gray light through the drawing-room windows. Hercule Poirot sat before the fire, warming his hands. On the table beside him lay a red leather-bound book, small, elegant, and locked. Poirot examined it with reverence, as if it were a sacred text. You understand, Hastings, that what we hold here is not simply a diary, it is a confession, a key, and perhaps an accusation. How did you find it? Hastings asked, glancing nervously toward the hallway. Poirot allowed himself a modest smile. Where one hides a treasure, mon ami, often depends not on logic but on vanity. Miss Lydia, for all her restraint, had a flair for the dramatic. In her dressing table, there was a false drawer, a compartment beneath the velvet. Voila! And the key? Poirot tapped his pocket, attached to a ribbon hidden in the lining of her glove box. She guarded it like a priestess. Now let us begin. With deliberate care, Poirot turned the key. The lock gave a soft click. Inside, the pages were lined in a precise hand, the ink a soft sepia. The first entries were mundane appointments, bridge games, remarks about the weather. But as Poirot turned deeper, the tone began to change. He read aloud, Celeste walks like a shadow. There is something in her eyes that was not there before. A darkness. I fear I no longer know my own cousin. Maureen's presence grows bolder. I believe she has discovered something. She watches me. There's an edge to her now, something almost triumphant. My stomach turns after tea. A bitterness on the tongue. It is subtle, almost imagined, but it recurs. I trust no one. Poirot paused and looked at Hastings. She knew, he said quietly, or at least, she suspected. Hastings leaned forward. But who did she suspect? Celeste or Maureen? Poirot turned to the final pages, dated just days before Lydia's death. He read in silence for a moment, then continued aloud. The argument was worse than I feared. Maureen accused me outright of cruelty, of betrayal. I told her the past is gone, that there is no justice in reviving what was better buried. But she will not be appeased. She thinks I owe her more than silence. She is wrong. She said she would not leave this house without her truth, that she would make me remember, that she would end it. Her eyes. I have never seen hatred so perfectly composed. I think I am being watched at night. There's the scent of something in my room, flowers, but not fresh ones, dried, poisonous. I believe Maureen has found the belladonna. I believe she means to use it. Poirot closed the book. My friend, he said, his voice low. The motive is beginning to crystallize. Hastings frowned. But Maureen, she's so refined, calm. It doesn't fit. Poirot gave a faint nod. Ah, mais c'est justement cela. A calm surface can hide deep waters. And Maureen has lived with something long buried, a past that Lydia refused to acknowledge. He rose and began to pace. Let us consider. Lydia, Celeste, and Maureen shared something long ago. Perhaps a secret. Perhaps a betrayal. Celeste's return has reopened old wounds. Lydia fears Maureen. She fears poison. She fears the truth. And the torn silk glove? Hastings asked. Poirot stopped pacing. It belonged to Celeste, but it was found hidden in Maureen's room. A strange thing, no. Do you think someone planted it? Poirot didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked to the writing desk and pulled out the glove. Holding it up to the light, he examined its seams. Then he pinched the lining gently, running his fingers along the inner silk. He stopped. His eyes gleamed. What is it? Hastings asked. Poirot withdrew a thin, curled piece of paper from the glove's lining. A note. He said softly. Old, folded tightly. It was never meant to be found. He unfolded it delicately, squinting to read the faded ink. I saw what happened in the lake. You cannot hide it forever. If she dies, I will speak. Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression unreadable. There's more to this than poison, Hastings. There is something older, a buried truth, and someone in this house is prepared to kill for it. He returned to the fireplace and tossed another log onto the flame. The red diary rested beside him, its final pages curling slightly at the edge from Poirot's touch. I will speak with Maureen, Poirot said at last. Alone. It is time. Chapter 17. The lake of Secret's wind had calmed, but the surface of the lake remained tense, a sheet of gray glass that offered no reflection. Hercule Poirot stood just beyond the veranda, watching its stillness with narrowed eyes before turning to face the woman standing nearby. Maureen Langford was impeccably dressed, her posture poised, her arms folded lightly across her waist. But there was something in her face, something hollow beneath the elegance. I received your note, Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice even. You said you had something important. Poirot inclined his head. It concerns Lydia and the past. Sit, madam. She hesitated, then took the bench opposite him. Poirot placed the red diary gently on the table between them, and beside it the note he had retrieved from the torn glove. Maureen's eyes dropped to the items. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, where did you find that? The glove. Hidden in your room. The note, stitched into its lining. A message meant, perhaps, for no one or someone very specific. He leaned forward slightly. You see, Madame Langford, it is clear there was a pact once between you and Celeste, something that Lydia betrayed. The lake has witnessed more than one tragedy, n'est-ce pas? Maureen's gaze did not waver, but her voice softened. I never meant for it to come to this. Poirot waited. We were girls when it happened. She said quietly, Celeste's sister Isabel drowned in that lake, but she didn't fall. She didn't wander. Lydia was there. Poirot's eyes flicked sharply. She pushed her. Maureen's lips thinned. She dared her to cross the edge of the old jetty. Isabel was terrified. She slipped. A pause. Lydia never told anyone. Not truly. The family buried it as an accident. Celeste's parents never forgave themselves. And you? Poirot asked gently. I stayed silent, Maureen whispered. Celeste asked me too. But over time, Lydia twisted the story. She made herself the victim of our grief. Even Celeste seemed to forget. But I didn't. I waited. Poirot opened the red diary. And when Celeste returned, she began to remember. I think the house, the lake. It brought it all back. Lydia knew. That's why she feared her. Poirot's voice dropped. So she feared being exposed. Maureen nodded slowly. But I did not poison her, Monsieur Poirot. I confronted her, yes. I wanted her to admit the truth to Celeste. But I never meant for her to die. Poirot studied her carefully. Then who, madam? If not you? Maureen's reply came low, almost breathless. There's one thing that doesn't make sense. Lydia had stopped taking her tea, but she did take the lavender cordial, the one Celeste makes herself. Poirot's eyes flashed with revelation, but he masked it with a slow nod. I thank you, madam, he said, rising. You have told me what I needed to hear. As he walked away from the lake, Poirot's mind stirred with clarity. The cordial, the glove, the diary, the secrets once drowned beneath still waters had begun to surface, and he now saw the shape of the murderer's shadow standing clearly behind them all. Chapter 18. A Cordial Invitation. Guests gathered in the drawing room once more, but this time it was Poirot who commanded the air with finality. The French windows had been drawn open, letting in the gray light of an approaching storm. No one spoke. Each person wore the expression of someone bracing for impact. Poirot stood near the fireplace, one hand resting upon the red diary, the other holding the fragile glove. "My friends," he began, "the threads of this case have been tightly knotted through time, through memory, and through betrayal. But the great advantage of the methodical mind being is that all knots, no matter how tangled, can be undone." He turned to face Celeste Dubois, who sat apart from the others, her expression unreadable. "Madame Dubois, it was you who prepared the cordial that Lydia drank the day before her collapse, was it not?" Celeste gave a slight nod. Poirot's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You alone knew that Lydia had stopped taking tea, and so you offered her the lavender cordial. A small, familiar comfort one she would not suspect." A murmur spread through the room. It was not the tea, Mzamas, nor the food, nor even the glass from which she drank. It was the cordial infused, not just with lavender, but with a precise tincture of monkshood. Celeste looked up, slowly. "You're very clever, Monsieur Poirot. I am also very thorough," he said quietly. "I found the monkshood in your herb garden, removed in haste, but not entirely. And then there was the note stitched into the lining of the glove, hidden away long ago." He turned the glove outward. "It reads, 'She killed Isabel. I saw her push. Forgive me for staying silent. It was your sister's name, was it not?" Celeste's face stiffened. "You did not remember it clearly at first," Poirot continued. "But once you returned to the lake, the memories stirred. And Maureen Langford, she confirmed what you had tried to forget. That Lydia dared Isabel into danger and let her drown. You weren't supposed to find that glove," Celeste said softly. Poirot tilted his head. "No, but fate like guilt has a curious way of surfacing." Colonel Bainbridge stood, his voice tense. "So she poisoned her, out of revenge." Poirot raised a hand. "Yes and no. Revenge, perhaps, but not blind rage. This was not a crime of madness. It was a ritual, quiet, measured. She waited until Lydia was alone, until the house had turned against her, and then she offered peace. In a glass, Celeste's voice was barely audible. She never wept, never showed remorse. Not for Isabel, not for anyone." Poirot met her gaze. "But you did. You mourned her twice, once as a child, and once again as the woman who remembered." Inspector Grange stepped forward. "I'll have to take you in, Miss Dubois." Celeste rose with unexpected calm. "I understand." Poirot stepped aside, allowing her to pass. As the door closed behind her and the inspector, the room remained hushed. Maureen Langford stared at the floor. "She did what I never had the courage to do." Poirot turned, addressing the room one last time. "Justice is not always blind. Sometimes it waits, it watches, and when it comes, it walks softly, as it did through the corridors of Langford House. But make no mistake, it always arrives." He paused, brushing a speck from his cuff. "As for Hercule Poirot, he prefers tea without poison, and truths without delay."